And good evening, and welcome to our Thursday night digital discussion. Tonight's will chill you to the bones. The weather, it feels like it should be this time of year. Finally, too. I mean, finally, unless you like the warm stuff. But we're finally into fall. We've got a great talk for you tonight. Halloween's a couple of weeks away, and who would have thought that wouldn't be the scariest thing in the world right now? So we have our gracious host tonight, Anna Lardinois, who you can see hanging out below me here. Before we get to Anna's talk tonight, I'm going to let everybody get logged in and get comfortable, maybe grab a beverage or whatnot, and tell you what's going on at the Historical Society. Our politics exhibit is going on through November, so you can find out the Milwaukee side of politics. We'll have a talk coming up the week before the election about Milwaukee politics with our curator, Ben Barbera. Speaking of talks, next week, same place, same time, 7:30 next Thursday. We have our board member and distinguished community member, Lindsay Draper, is going to be talking about youth activism and driving social change. Great talk about youth activism coming up next week. And we have one Halloween bike ride that is not sold out. That's actually on Halloween. So, and that was, it's during the day too. So it doesn't interfere with, I don't know what plans you would have this year, but it won't interfere with anything you have going on later on. Drinking in the dark. I don't know what you do for Halloween this year. We have our Halloween bike ride, MilwaukeeHistory.net. There are limited tickets available still for the one on Halloween. And that's enough out of me. I'm going to turn things over to our host for this evening. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments, and we will get back to those at the end. But Anna, spooky and scandalous Milwaukee. Let's hear all about it.
Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Lardinois, and John was saying he wasn't sure what you should be doing this year on Halloween, but I think that this is a perfect year to gather around a fire and tell some spooky tales. So I'm going to tell you a few tonight that may be fun for you and friends, and a few stories from my brand new book, Storied in Scandalous, Wisconsin. So without any further ado, let's get to it. This is one of my favorite spooky tales. And I can see that there's a little syncing problem, so just roll with it. Maybe you can even close your eyes if you want, and maybe it'll be a little more spooky for you. So a picture of one of my favorite buildings downtown and one of Milwaukee's most famously haunted buildings. You know it, and I know it. It's the Pfister Hotel. The Pfister is a really fun place because if you are someone who comes into Milwaukee and you're looking to stay at a haunted hotel, chances are you're going to stay at the Pfister Hotel. And you'll want to stay in the original part of the hotel. That tower is added in 1965. So when you're in the old part of the hotel, you are surrounded by that turn-of-the-century glamour that everyone loves. And maybe one person who loves it a little bit more. Maybe Charles Pfister. I think you know that the Pfister is so famously haunted because of Major League Baseball stories. You probably remember the summer of 2018 when a Cardinals pitcher was staying in the hotel. He woke up in the middle of the night, jumped onto Instagram, filmed himself saying he was just touched by the Pfister ghost. And you probably know that there's been so many stories with Major League Baseball that ESPN has done an expose on the hotel. Sports Illustrated has done an expose on the hotel. And it's regularly made national news. The story I like to tell with Major League Baseball and the Pfister is the story of Carlos Gomez. And I like telling this story because a lot of people know who he is, and that makes it a little bit more fun. So Carlos Gomez, as we all remember, was a Milwaukee Brewer, but before that, he was a Minnesota Twin. And that's what brings him into Milwaukee. He's playing against the Brewers, getting ready for bed. And one night, as he comes out of the bathroom with just a towel wrapped around his waist, some movement out of the corner of his eye catches it. And he turns to look to see what's moving. And he sees his iPod shimmy across the table. And as he's looking at that, thinking, how is that even possible? Suddenly there's banging on all sides of the room around him. He is terrified. He grabs his trousers, does not put them on, starts running down the grand staircase to the front desk, saying, "Get me out of here." And to this day, he refuses to step foot in this hotel. Now, one of the fun things about the hotel's most famous ghost, Charles Pfister, is that many people believe that he is the source of all of these Major League Baseball problems. Because in his day, it was really common to harass traveling teams. That whole idea of having your home field advantage wasn't just because you knew your field, but it was because no one spit in your food and because you had a restful night's sleep. Because what people would do is they would go to the hotel where the traveling team is staying and they would pound on the players' windows all night. So they'd sleep terribly. They'd play poorly the next day. And then you'd be a hometown hero if you were doing this. Well, it's pretty well known that if you're a Milwaukee Brewer and you stay at the Pfister, you're going to sleep like a tiny angel. But if you're staying and you're playing against the Brewers, rumor tells us it might be a tough night. And that's thought to be courtesy of Charles Pfister, the most famous ghost in the hotel. You probably have heard legends about Charles Pfister. He's most often seen in the grand staircase, in the Imperial dining room, which is what you're seeing on the slide now. And if you're very, very lucky, you may catch a glimpse of him walking at night on the 6th floor, which is where his suite of rooms was when he lived there. They say if you are lucky enough to see Charles Pfister in the hotel, something in the room probably changes. You might feel his presence. Lights might brighten or dim. Curtains open or close. Something changes. And he's thought that he's still there just trying to delight you, just trying to make it the perfect visit. How do you not love Charles Pfister? I think he's the best apparition of all of downtown. He wants the hometown team to win, and he just wants you to have an amazing time in his hotel. So that is Milwaukee's most famously hotel, and it's our first spooky entry for the night. Now let's dip into a little Scandalous. I wish that we were in person because then I could see you and ask you, does anyone know what this is a picture of? And then somebody would definitely say yes, because usually people know everything I'm going to tell before I tell it. Well, this photo, which I was lucky enough to find on Historic Images and purchase, is a photo from 1935 Milwaukee, if that gives you any hints. And the story that I want to tell you about is one of Milwaukee's scandalous former citizens. And you might know him as Arthur Price Roberts. Now, that name might not sound familiar, but maybe Doc Roberts does. Doc Roberts was at one time the most famous psychic in America, and he lived right here in Milwaukee. They called him the psychic detective. Some people even called him the American Sherlock Holmes, because he would do exactly what that fictional character does, is he would make some unnerving statement about you when he met you. But unlike Sherlock Holmes, he didn't use observation. He used psychic powers. And he's famous for many, many years. But how he becomes by far the most famous man in 1935 is by making a prediction that there was going to be a series of bombings in Milwaukee. And he predicts that there will be a series of bombings. He predicts that there will be 2 banks blowing up. He goes on to even say that there's going to be a big blow up south of Menominee River, and then it'll be all over. And this prediction, which is shocking, takes the city by storm. But the police are not impressed. Yet 8 days after he makes this prediction, and this is totally true, you can Google it, the Shorewood Village Hall is dynamited. And shortly after that, 2 First National banks are dynamited. And the city is terrified. There's now been 3 bombings in the city. And there's a big outcry, even from practical Milwaukeeans, to say, work with this psychic. Help us, police. And the police say, we are not working with a psychic. No, we have federal authorities coming in. We have state authorities coming in. We have police clues. We're not going to do it. And then a police substation is bombed. And now there's been 4 bombings in Milwaukee. And the police finally do work with Doc Roberts. And he does what he can to try to discover the source of the bombings, but he's not able to do it. But he gives a description of the room in which the bombs are being built. And it sounds a lot like a garage or a shed. So instantly Milwaukee becomes more nosy than it has ever been. People pressing their faces to the windows of their neighbors' potting sheds and lean-tos, wondering if their neighbor is the bomber. This goes on for a while until November 4th, where there is an explosion that is so powerful in Milwaukee, it is heard for over 8 miles. And what you're seeing in front of you now, that is the epicenter of that explosion that Doc Roberts predicted. And when he predicted that it was going to be all over, he was definitely right. And what you can't see in the picture in front of you, but what definitely happened, was that the reason that the bombing stopped that day is because in this mess, the bombers blew themselves up. People were very curious as to how Doc Roberts knew all of this. Some people even thought he must certainly have been involved in the bombing somehow, but there was never any evidence to prove that. He went on to do a number of other notable predictions, helping to find a dead body that was missing, helping to locate a murderer that had fled the country. It's all very fascinating. But some people still in Milwaukee were unconvinced. He was a bit of a charlatan. He was arrested for fortune telling in 1899 in Milwaukee, and was fined again when he was part of a sting where policewomen came in and received some fake predictions from him. He was appalled that they would even question his psychic abilities. And many people believed him because to this day, Doc Roberts is sometimes cited as evidence of psychic phenomena. His very last prediction probably was his most important one. He was at a dinner party at the end of 1939, and he said to his friends, I'm not going to be at the next dinner party. And they wondered why. And he says, I'm going to be dead. And he predicts that he will be dead by the end of the first week of January. And wouldn't you know, he dies that very week of natural causes, making his final prediction his most important and probably the most, it's just ghosts, you don't have to worry, and most important and meaningful in his life. So that's a scandal for us. And I bet you're wondering what's coming next. I kind of am too. Let's see. Spooky. Does anyone recognize where this place is? I bet some of you do. And I really love this story because I think it's incredibly sweet. And I also love it because it's a story that we have a lot of background that shows how it's been told generation after generation. And I find that really wonderful. This is the story of the haunting of the Miller Caves. The Miller Caves, which still exist, and people sometimes go there just to have a supernatural experience. And they talk about these young lovers that made use of the caves in a time after they were no longer needed for refrigeration. After after modern cooling technology came and they no longer needed to use these caves, employees of the brewery made good use of the cool air to get some relief from the hot summer heat. And one of the people who did that in the past is a young man who began courting a young girl. And it was a summer of love. And we remember when we were young and how that just felt like it was everything, those butterflies in your stomach and just having the opportunity to hold hands with this person that lit you up like a candle. That's what it was like for these two. So he would work his hot, sweaty shift. She would wait at the mouth of the cave for him. And they would go quietly strolling through these caves. The cool and the dark, they got to know each other better, probably laughing, maybe stealing a kiss or two in the shadows. And it went on like that all summer. And as summer grew to fall, she was waiting in her usual spot like she always did. But he didn't arrive. And she was concerned. She hears the church bells ringing. She realizes how long she's been waiting. And she wonders if something's changed, if maybe he isn't interested anymore. And she's devastated. So she quietly goes home and takes off her new dress and gets into bed. And then there's a phone call at the house. She hears that this young man she was waiting for, he didn't abandon her. In his excitement to reach her, he falls down the steps, strikes his head on a stone, is rendered unconscious. So in love, she runs to his side, holds his hand, but he never wakes up. And a few days later, he passes away. And this young woman who has spent her whole summer being in love with this man, her heart is broken. And even though she was a healthy girl with no health problems at all, just weeks later, she ends up dying. Now, the doctors say it was a lung ailment, but the people who knew her best claim that no, she died of a broken heart. Shortly after she was buried, there started becoming some strange reports that happened in these caves. Some people claim that they saw a shimmering apparition at the mouth of the cave. Sometimes people claim that as they're walking through the cave, they'll hear just little strands of laughter around the corner, or they'll hear some footfalls that when security goes to follow them, aren't connected to anyone. And many people believe that all those sounds are the lovers still united together in that cave, continuing that summer of love for eternity. And I think that's a lovely story. So let's see what we've got next. Ooh, it's Scandalous. So this is a little bit of scandal and just a tiny little bit of ghost. So on the left, we have, as I'm sure many of you recognize, Frank Balistreri, the more than rumored former mob head in Milwaukee. And we get a little bit of ghost with him because his headquarters, as many of us remember, was the Shorecrest Hotel. His hangout was Snugs in the bottom of the hotel. And why we say that that's a little bit spooky is because many people have reported that even though those days of tough guys and malls are gone, something of that still lingers in the Shorecrest. There is a grand piano that is in the lobby that sometimes gets played in the middle of the night. And maybe it's echoes of those fabulous parties, of that wild nightlife that used to be a part of the hotel. We also get a little bit of ghost with Frank Balistreri because of the bombing that left Augie Palmisano dead. People who live downtown probably know that there is a building where one of the low-level mob guys in Milwaukee who had the audacity to criticize Frank Balistreri received a payback in the form of a car bomb. And Milwaukee police know it is a mob hit, but they sure don't have evidence to support it. That is until Frank Balistreri wanted to impress a man named Donnie Brasco. And you might remember Donnie Brasco as a movie starring Johnny Depp about a undercover FBI agent who infiltrates the mob. And he comes into Milwaukee, and Frank Balistreri wants to impress this man. He wants to let people know that Milwaukee is definitely on the map. So he leans over during some after dinner cocktails and he says to Donnie Brasco, there was a guy named Augie Palmisano. He called me a name to my face, and now they can't find his skin. And that was all caught on tape. And from that moment, the police had enough evidence to bring down the Milwaukee Mafia, all because this man here wanted to impress someone about what he could do. So a little bit of ghost, a little bit of scandal. And next to him is the grave marker of Sally Papilla, who many people called the Queen Bee of Milwaukee Mafia. And she might be the boldest and sassiest lady that is in the Storied and Scandalous book. We all remember her as a lady who ran Sally's Steakhouse out of the Knickerbocker Hotel. And she created a place where high and low society mingled and things were always exciting. But behind the scenes, she was a lady who was going to get what she wanted. And that happens in a really explicit way when she ends up lending money to a chef to open his own restaurant. And this chef didn't pay the money back quickly enough for Sally. And so Sally tells him, if you don't pay this back, something's going to happen. People have accidents all the time. Places burn down. But if you pay it back, it'll be fine. Well, these people don't have the money to pay her back right away. And wouldn't you know, just days after Christmas, or before New Year's Eve, I believe the 29th of December, their restaurant burns to the ground. Burns to the ground might be an overstatement, but you got to go with me. It's scandalous. It burns enough to close. And they've got a pretty good idea about who did this. Sally runs into them over the holidays at a restaurant, and she, in her dramatic way, lights a match and lets it burn into an ashtray and says, essentially, I told you so. Well, eventually the law catches up with Sally, and she does a little time for this, but only at night because she's got a business to run. So she's in jail for 60 days, but from I think 1 in the morning until 9 in the morning is all the time she spends in jail. And then this woman has the guts to sue this man whose restaurant she burned down for the remainder of this loan. And you know what? She wins. So she ends up getting her money. She does a little more jail time for some other things, but this woman cannot and will not be stopped. She's a page turner in Storied and Scandalous. There is, in fact, a chapter about the Milwaukee and Madison Mafia, some stories that you may know, some new ones for you. And of course, I could not have a Wisconsin-based scandal book without including the exciting shootout up north at Little Bohemia. I'm going to give you another one that's storied, scandalous, and spooky. And it's really, I think, one of my favorite stories because it has everything. It's this story. It's the story of Taliesin. And I know because we live in Wisconsin, a lot of us know the setup to this story. We know about the torrid love affair between Mamie Cheney and Frank Lloyd Wright. We know how he kind of stole her from her husband because they had hired him to design their house. And we know about their torrid affair. Then we know the terrible ending. We know that Mamie's children were visiting Taliesin when Carlton, the jack of all trades that worked at Taliesin, for reasons we will never know, plunged an axe into her and her children and then lit the building on fire. It was a bloody massacre, but it was the loss of this woman and those children that resonated throughout the country. And while the names of the other men who worked there, who died in that fire or by the swinging axe that was hitting them as they tried to flee from the fire, those names have been lost. But her and her children, they remain close to us. And perhaps it was because of the heavy loss that Wright felt after she died. He decides to rebuild Taliesin exactly as it was before. And he ends up marrying another woman, but there is no love and happiness in this house the way that there was when Mamie was alive. And in 1925, one night he's in the home, and again, some smoke starts creeping into that building. A fire is crackling. He runs into the bedroom that he once shared with this woman, and he sees that it's on fire. What has happened is lightning has struck the house, gone through the telephone line, and created this fire in their bedroom. And you don't have to be particularly connected to the supernatural to see that there's something interesting there, that this message from beyond in this place where they had spent so many happy times. And there's a fire just like there was the last time she was there. Well, he rebuilds it a third time, and that is what we can see today. Mama is buried on the grounds, and it was Wright's wish that he would be buried there as well. And he has a marker there. But his third wife chose to have him instead cremated and have his ashes mixed with hers. And many people believe that that is because of the deep jealousy she felt over the loss, or she felt jealous of how much he still loved this woman, even many, many years after their loss. Many people believe that Mama and the children, after they were brutally attacked by the axe, were taken to a cottage on the grounds. And that cottage is apparently infused with this woman's spirit. Apparently, it's so strong there that sometimes the shades will just fly open all at once. People claim that they see this woman in a clean white gown roaming through the grounds, happy, moving beyond that day, but still in this place that she shared with a man she was willing to give up everything for. It's fun, and it has scandal. I'm going to take a little pause now and see how we're doing. I'd love to answer a few questions if we have any. I am willing to answer anything.
All right. I can bring in here, was Charles Pfister a baseball fan? Carl wants to know.
Well, that is my understanding. Now, granted, the Brewers are a fairly new team historically, but baseball has always been something that's been played in Milwaukee. And my understanding is he was a big fan.
Well, and we actually had the minor league Milwaukee Brewers around the early part of the century. So my guess is that was the team. And
well,
then
he was quite a sportsman, even though he doesn't, like, if you have ever seen pictures of him, he definitely looks like a man who did not pass up desserts often. But he was quite a sporting man, and he did a lot of hunting, and he was an active guy who loved competition.
All right. Paul, we're in talking about the story about the bombing, wants to know, is that the bombing that a little girl was killed in?
It sure was. I'm sorry that I forgot to mention that. That bombing it looked terrible, of course. Only one little girl dies. She's 9 years old. Her bedroom wall ends up collapsing on her. But lots and lots of people are injured that day because of flying debris. It's hard to believe that something like that can happen and have so few casualties.
Sure. Yeah, crazy. And then one last one before we continue, which is from Martha. And what was the restaurant that burned down? She missed it.
Oh, I believe it's called the North Woods. But you know how you can find out for sure? Definitely look at the book.
Yeah, there you go. So, which I put those links up in our chat here too. So I'll put them up again before the end. But yeah, you can find those at MilwaukeeHistory.net in the shop. But you can take it away once again.
Certainly. I am going to give you a little preview of the next book. So we have Ghosts, we have Scandalous now, and I'm wrapping up a book called Shipwrecks of the Great Lakes. And this book came about because there is a chapter in Storied and Scandalous that covers shipwrecks, because you and I both know how important the Great Lakes are to Milwaukee. We're flanked by two of them. Trade through the lakes was a really important part of the development in Milwaukee, and we have many stories that are deeply rooted in the lakes. You probably also know that they estimate that there's been about 10,000 shipwrecks on the Great Lakes, and over 30,000 people have lost their lives. And that's just in the modern era. It sounds like something that is from a long time ago, but Every single year, people lose their lives on the Great Lakes. So I'm going to tell you a story of the Ironsides. The Ironsides makes a little preview in Milwaukee Ghosts and Legends, and then we look at it a little more closely in Shipwrecks of the Great Lakes. So when the Ironsides was first launched, it was a luxury ship. There was gleaming marble everywhere, beautiful woodwork. The staterooms had hot and cold running water in them at a time when some people's homes didn't have that. It was a lovely place to be. But that was on the surface. The sailors who worked on that ship knew very well that things were not good with the ship. And what they decide to do is they decide to start protesting this. They believe that the ship needs to be fully rehauled, but each year they just slap another piece of paint on it and it stays together for another year. But every year their cargo's a little more wet and a little more wet. And on that last season, they're unloading this when no one is around so that people don't see how much trouble the ship's really in. And sailors decided they don't even want to work on the ship anymore. But the company that owns it, a Milwaukee-based company, they decided to make it worth the sailors' while. They say, yeah, we're not going to repair this ship, but we will pay you a premium to work on it. And people who need money decide to take them up on it. It's dangerous, but it's extra money. And if they can just get one more ride out of this leaky ship, it might be worth it. And that's the ship that Henry Valentine buys passage for his wife and his child to take a pleasure cruise of the lake. They're sailing across the lake to Grand Haven. It's going to be a lovely time. It's their son's very first time on a ship. And they bought him a lovely little sailor outfit. He is, by all accounts, an angel. A blonde, golden curls, big blue eyes, and he is charming everyone on this ship. Well, before long, they blow the horn, and Dad realizes it's time to go. So he kisses his wife, Nellie, and son, gets off the ship and waves to them from the pier, knowing that he's purchased for his beloved family passage on the most elegant liner possible. It is smooth sailing, and the young boy is delighted and traveling all over the boat. But soon it's time to go to bed, and so the boy and his mother go to their stateroom and sleep. And in the night, a gale comes through, and a gale is when there's very heavy winds and high waves, and it's a storm that this ship is fighting through. As the ship twists and turns in the waves to try to keep itself afloat, all of those cracks that have been appearing in the ship become larger and larger, and the ship begins to fill with water. All of the pumps are running as quickly as they can, but it does nothing to keep the water from building up. And soon the water is knee high below deck. The captain realizes it's a lost cause, and he decides to call everyone. It's the next morning, tell them that the ship is going down and prepare to evacuate. Now, fortunately, this ship has plenty of lifeboats and enough flotation devices for all. But the waves are high and the winds are blowing heavy. And these tiny little lifeboats are no match for the tremendous waves that are crashing on this ship. So he begins to evacuate. People get on these boats as they're watching the Ironsides sink slowly behind them, and they cling to the sides of these boats. They realize that they are in terrible trouble because these boats are being tossed in the waves. They are being flung over. And every time they tip over and people fall out, fewer people get back on those little boats. And eventually, they just don't come up any longer. Now, a few people do make it to shore, and they tell the tale of the sinking of the ship, and they hope and pray that there are still people out there who are alive. Maybe they're clinging to a piece of ballast. Maybe they managed to right the ship one final time and are waiting for rescue. So they go out to the location of the Ironsides, and they're able to pluck some of these people out of the water because their flotation devices worked, and their corpses are bobbing in the water, and they pull them out. And one of the men from the ship recognizes the woman, and he remembers, oh, what about that little boy? What about her son? He's reluctant to leave that boy out there. So they scan even harder, and they find this little boy that delighted everyone on board, half buried in the sand. And when they pull his corpse from the sand, they're shocked because he's pristine. There's not a scratch on him. It almost appears like he's sleeping. He's so peaceful. They describe him as an angel. And they bring this boy on board, and they lay him next to his mother. And they seal both of them in a box and send that box back to Milwaukee. Henry Valentine gets notification that this has happened, and he has heard that his wife and his son are gone, but he desperately wants this not to be true. So he waits for the boat. It comes to shore. He is hoping and praying that they are going to run off that ship and into his arms. But all he gets is that box. And the box is laid to rest here in Milwaukee. But there is a substantial amount of evidence that indicates that maybe young Henry didn't make it back with his body. What happens next is very unusual because it happens in modern times in the 2000s, and it involves the US Coast Guard, people that are not fanciful, that are not in rooms with candles telling you ghost stories, people who are of science. Every year, the Coast Guard has a rally in Grand Haven, and the big boats come out, and there's a celebration, and people sail in from all over to participate in this. And as that festival is wrapping up, very heavy fog rolls in. And one of the Coast Guard ships is absolutely certain that they hear the call of a young boy asking for help. They're the Coast Guard. They can't ignore this. They can't see a single thing in the heavy fog. So they contact the life-saving station, and the life-saving station also claims that they can hear this. So they send a rescue boat out, but they don't find anything. But they can't shake it. They know they heard it. Many people heard this cry for help. So they start contacting the other pleasure boats in the area to see if anyone needs help. No one does. There's no missing children. It's inexplicable. Until they were talking about it later, and they realized that they were very near the wreck of the Ironsides. And maybe that cry for help, maybe that was a cry that was left over from over 100 years ago, when little Henry Valentine wanted nothing more than to be plucked from the waves. I honestly do not know what time it is, so I'm not sure how long I've been talking. How are we doing here?
We are. It's about 8:15, a little after. So,
Okay, well, I think that might be a good
yeah.
place to end this. I just want to tell people, and I'm really willing to answering other questions, how much I genuinely appreciate having the opportunity to tell these stories to you. To me, this is such a pure joy, and I'm so happy to be able to share my love of history and of folklore with you.
So I'm going to start with the first question, and those
Sure.
stories were just wonderful and things I had no idea of. I've been on that Miller tour a million times, and never knew those stories.
Oh, can I tell you a cool thing about that, though?
What's that?
That Miller story is actually part of Miller's archival records, because it's been told
Cool.
so many times that it has been canonized in their own stuff, which I think is fabulous. It's kind of like our own Resurrection Mary story.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'll be, when I finally can go back. I don't know if the Miller tour is the first thing I'll do post pandemic, but it'll be early in there. But no, when we can finally go back to the things. But yeah. So how did you? Because you lead haunted tours around Milwaukee, in addition to writing these books about the scandals and the ghosts and things. So how did you get into this line of work, I guess, is my question.
Well, a lot of people know I used to be a high school English teacher, and every year during spring break, I would take my own solo road trip. So, and when you're traveling by yourself as a woman, it can be kind of sketchy sometimes. And that's really when I got into ghost tours, because I'd be in a different city every night. And so I would go to a different ghost tour every night because they're really fun and they're super safe. And I love stories. I love history. I love architecture. I love everything about them. And so I was just doing so many of them. And then I decided it would be really cool to do my own in Milwaukee, because it's brought me so much joy. And it kind of grew from there. It was just something I decided to do one year for fun. And it's become kind of popular now, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah. That's your passion shows through, and obviously you have your lights turned low and your candles burning. Cool. So what with the last story with the shipwreck, Paul wants to know what year do you remember what year that happened?
I sure should know that off the top of my head, but I don't. I do not let things like facts get in the way of a good story, Paul. But I'm always very careful to have the right years and dates in the books, because you know what people love? Fact checking.
Yes.
So
when is the next book coming out? This is the one about.
Well,
that's coming out soon, right?
That's coming out in the summer of 2021. But we're just going to focus on scandals. But if you know me, you know I love a maritime disaster. Even on my most popular ghost tour that I do, I have a little section of maritime disasters, because I can't get enough of them.
Sure.
I love the water. Lake Michigan is amazing. But I also like that it's so powerful. The second you get on a ship, you're already in peril. So it just goes on from there. It's fantastic.
So your new book is Storied and Scandalous, Wisconsin. By the way, you can find both of these at milwaukeehistory.net /shop, or you can go into the Historical Society. And I'm sure Anna would love to sign up some books or anything like that. If you do purchase them.
If you want that, I'll write anything you want in it.
Cool. So I'm sure there's a lot of crossover with what you do with like people who are serious hardcore ghost hunters at times.
Yeah, that's not really so much my thing.
Okay, I was going to
And
ask if you've gone on those
yeah,
types of things.
well, here's the thing, and I always know if somebody's familiar with my work if they're contacting me to like attend a séance or something. That's not my thing.
Okay.
And I feel like I have too much compassion to be a ghost hunter because I love where I live right now and I could maybe even want to live here for eternity. Do I really want people to come to me at 3 a.m. when I'm a dead spirit and just start screaming my name and asking me to turn on flashlights? I would not like that now. And I can't imagine Ghost Anna wouldn't like it either.
Yeah.
So it's just not my thing. That
Yeah,
doesn't mean
poke the
anyone who
bear.
does it is bad. It's just not my thing.
That makes sense. That's a funny way to put it. I never thought of it that way. Oh, good stuff. Well, so you have your if somebody would, because I'm guessing now is your in normal times would be a very busy time of year, but you are still
Mhm.
running tours at the moment.
We are still running really limited tours, very small. I'm happy to say that we are selling tickets. If this is something that you're interested in doing, please know that the guide and every guest must wear a face mask that covers the nose and mouth for the entire time. I know that it's outside, but just out of an abundance of caution, we don't need new ghost stories that bad. So we
Right.
want you to be safe.
Cool. You can Google Anna and haunted.
Well, actually,
Or is it haunted
Gothic
Milwaukee?
Milwaukee. Gothic
Gothic
Milwaukee
Milwaukee.
is me on everything.
Okay,
So
cool. So if you're
if you
interested in that, yeah, that's great. Cool. Well, I think it's time for a cocktail, honestly.
great.
So I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
I'm gonna let you
Thank
go.
you
Thank
very
you. No problem, and thank you for bringing your spooky stories to us. And again, we have those books for sale. If you'd like those, just come to the Historical Society or go to MilwaukeeHistory.net. Next week, we're changing gears significantly
Ooh,
to youth activism and driving social change. So there'll be some great Milwaukee stuff in there about some of the movements and involving youth activism. So
awesome.
same place, same time next week. But Anna, stay safe, and everybody else stay safe as well. And we
And
hope you
stay
can make it next week.
spooky.
Stay spooky. There we go. All right. All right. Take
Bye-bye
it
now.
easy, everybody.